She whispered, "I trust you," and he promised more than he could deliver. In that moment of innocence, neither imagined the price they'd pay for that promise. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, because the ending will break your heart. The black Audi pulled up in front of Elise's modest apartment exactly at 8 o'clock that evening, and when the tinted window descended, revealing that man in an impeccable suit and eyes that promised the entire world, she felt her heart stop for a brief second. At 23 years old, working double shifts between the flower shop on the corner and the cafe on Market Street, she never imagined that special delivery of white lilies 3 weeks ago would completely change the course of her existence. The scent of flowers still lingered on her hands when Graham first appeared, asking for the purest ones you have, and since then, he returned every day, always at the same time, always with that smile that made her legs tremble and accelerated a heart she believed immune to such vulnerabilities. Elise watched the luxury vehicle from the window of her small apartment in South Philadelphia, where paint peeled in the corners and the smell of Mrs. Chen's beef stew from the third floor seeped through the cracks. Her reflection in the fogged glass returned the image of a young woman with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, cheeks flushed from the humid summer heat of Philadelphia, hands rough from handling stems and watering pots. She wasn't a fairy tale princess, but there was something in her hazel eyes that spoke of guarded dreams and hopes that refused to die. When she finally descended the stairs, her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird seeking freedom. Graham exited the car with the natural elegance of someone born to occupy spaces, tall and broad-shouldered, with that dark hair combed back that was beginning to show silver strands at the temples. 40 years of life could be read in the fine lines around his green eyes, but one could also read experience, a lived world, stories she yearned to discover. "You look beautiful," he said, and although she knew her navy blue dress was the only elegant one she owned, bought on sale 2 years ago, the way he looked at her made her feel like she was wearing haute couture. The air conditioning in the car contrasted with the humid heat of the night as they drove through Philadelphia's illuminated streets, passing Independence Hall with its colonial architecture, whose facades told stories of revolutionary history the city preserved with pride. Elise felt her palms sweaty on her lap, nervous and excited in equal parts, conscious that she was crossing an invisible threshold toward a world she had always observed from outside. The restaurant occupied the top floor of the city's most exclusive hotel, with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the illuminated skyline like a jewel against the night sky. The soft sound of the grand piano mixed with the discreet clinking of crystal glasses, and the waiters moved with the choreographed precision of dancers on an invisible stage. "I've never been to a place like this," Elise confessed, as they took their seats at a window table where the city lights flickered like crystallized promises. "I know," Graham responded with a smile that was pure tenderness. "That's why I brought you here. I wanted to see how your eyes shine when you discover something new. It's like seeing the world for the first time through your gaze." Between bites of lobster risotto that she barely touched from nerves, Graham shared fragments of his life. The empire built from scratch over 20 years, the sleepless nights since he started at 20 with just a dream and plenty of audacity, the profound loneliness that money could never quite fill. "I'm 40 years old," he confessed, his eyes seeking hers with a vulnerability that contrasted with his appearance as a confident man. "And I've never met anyone like you, Elise. You're different from everyone. You make me remember who I was before all this, before the endless meetings and tailored suits. You give me back something I thought I'd lost, the capacity to be amazed." Elise felt something melt in her chest, an invisible barrier she didn't know she had built to protect herself from disappointments. Because in Graham's eyes she didn't see the rich man who could be with any woman in the world, but the boy who once dreamed of being someone, the young man who fought against all odds, the man who now confessed his loneliness with the courage of someone who had nothing left to prove. "I also feel different when I'm with you," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper over the restaurant's elegant murmur. "As if I could be more than I've always been. As if the world were bigger than my imagination could hold." The night extended in conversations that flowed like rivers finding their natural course, shared laughter that resonated with the authenticity of two souls recognizing each other, comfortable silences where words weren't necessary because eyes said everything. And when Graham drove her back to her apartment long after midnight, He kissed her hand with a reverence that made her feel not like Cinderella waiting for the spell to break, but like a queen who had just discovered her own kingdom. That night, lying in her narrow bed while the summer heat crept through the open window, Elise couldn't sleep. Her mind spun around the image of that man who seemed to have stepped out of her most secret dreams, wondering if it was possible that something so beautiful could be real, if she, a simple florist with rough hands and modest dreams, deserved such happiness. She didn't know then, couldn't know, that the most beautiful endings often emerge from the most broken promises, and that true love isn't found in the shining heights of first promises, but in the deep valleys where it's tested, broken, and rebuilt with trembling but determined hands. The following 3 months unfolded like a dream from which Elise feared waking. Graham enveloped her in a world of possibilities she never dared imagine, opening doors she always believed closed to someone like her. On weekends, the black Audi picked her up early, and they drove to the beaches of Cape May, where the white sand looked like refined sugar, and the Atlantic showed impossible shades of turquoise that no photograph could capture justly. They walked barefoot along the shore, their fingers intertwined, while waves licked their feet and the sun drew golden reflections on the water. In those moments, with the salt breeze tangling her hair and Graham's laughter resonating beside her, Elise allowed herself to believe that fairy tales existed outside of books. Dinners followed in restaurants where waiters knew Graham's name and served aged steaks carved with the precision of an ancestral art. Elise tasted flavors she didn't know existed, caviar that burst salty on her tongue, wines that bore names of century-old vineyards, elaborate desserts that looked like small edible sculptures. Each meal was an education in itself, and Graham seemed to delight in being her guide through this world of refinement. Gifts arrived in velvet-lined boxes, but it wasn't just the jewelry that moved her. It was the book of Robert Frost poetry she casually mentioned during a conversation about verse, the vinyl record of jazz from the artist playing on the radio when they met, the exotic flower seeds with cultivation instructions written by his hand. Each gift demonstrated that Graham paid attention to every word that left her lips, that he treasured her preferences and transformed them into tangible gestures. "Why do you do all this?" Elise asked one afternoon, sitting on the balcony of Graham's luxurious apartment in Rittenhouse Square, where their relationship celebrations had moved. The view stretched over the city, like an urban tapestry of glass buildings and green trees. "Because you deserve to see the world that always existed, but no one showed you," he responded, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands between his. "Because when I see you discover something new, when your eyes light up with that genuine wonder, I remember that life has magic, and I want to give you that magic every day." But not everything was perfect in this crystal world. Elise's friends at the flower shop saw her less and less, and when they met there was a new distance that none of them knew how to cross. Claire, her best friend since childhood, looked at her with a mixture of happiness and concern that Elise preferred not to analyze too deeply. "Just be careful," Claire warned during one of their rare lunches together, biting her sandwich with more force than necessary. "Fairy tales are beautiful, but they're also stories, Elise, and stories end." "This is different," Elise insisted, though her voice sounded less convinced than she intended. "Graham is different." Her shifts at the cafe on Market Street were drastically reduced. Graham insisted she rest, that she worked too hard, that she deserved time to enjoy life instead of just surviving it. And while part of her appreciated the concern, another part, the part raised by a grandmother who cleaned houses in luxury condos to support them both, felt uncomfortable with so much dependence. Grandma Violet, with her 78 years and hands wrinkled like maps of a life lived with dignity, didn't share the blind enthusiasm that Elise tried to maintain. "True love isn't measured in gifts, child," she said one afternoon while they drank tea in her small apartment that smelled of lavender and memories. "It's measured in how he treats you when he has nothing to give except his presence. When life gets hard, when the shine fades, that's where you know a person's heart." "I know, Grandma," Elise responded, though her words sounded more like a wish than a certainty. "But he makes me happy. Isn't that enough? Happiness that depends on another is like a cut flower, beautiful but destined to wither. True happiness grows from within, my dear. Make sure you don't lose your own roots while chasing his garden." Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, during nights when Graham slept beside her in Egyptian cotton sheets, and she stared at the ceiling decorated with elaborate moldings. She felt divided between two worlds, the one she knew by heart with rough memories and daily struggles, and this new world of comforts and shining promises. And in that division, something small but persistent began to grow. Doubt. The fourth month brought subtle changes that Elise initially tried to ignore. Graham's phone rang with increasing frequency during dinners, and he stepped away to answer, with expressions increasingly tense etched on his face. The lines around his eyes deepened, and there were nights when she found him awake in his study, surrounded by papers with a half-finished glass of whiskey in his hand. "Is everything okay?" she would ask, approaching to massage his tense shoulders. "Just complicated business, love," he would respond with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing to worry about. I'll resolve everything." But last-minute meetings began cancelling planned weekends. The trip to New York they had organized was postponed. The romantic getaway to the Pocono Mountains never happened. The project for the estate in the Napa Valley, that shared dream he described with passion, where they would create a refuge for people with aspirations like those they once had, was delayed first to 3 months, then to 6, finally indefinitely. Elise found herself spending more time alone in the luxurious apartment that was beginning to feel like a gilded cage. She explored the rooms like a stranger in a museum, touching expensive objects that had no personal histories, sitting on designer furniture that never felt completely comfortable. She found herself missing her small apartment in South Philly, where she knew all the neighbors by name, and the smell of Mrs. Chen's dumplings from the second floor made her feel at home. One afternoon, while Graham was at another urgent meeting, Elise decided to visit the flower shop where she worked. The owner, Mr. Henderson, received her with a warm but sad smile. "We miss you around here, Elise. The place isn't the same without your laugh and your ability to make every arrangement tell a story." "I miss it too," she admitted, touching the petals of a rose with the familiarity of years of practice. "Sometimes I feel like I lost something important on the way to all this." Mr. Henderson, who had known her since she was a teenager looking for her first job, observed her with the wisdom of his 60 years. "Love shouldn't make you feel like you lost something, girl. It should make you feel like you gained without stopping being who you are. If you feel lost, maybe it's time to ask some difficult questions." That night, Elise found Graham in his study, sunken in his leather chair, with his face hidden in his hands. His posture spoke of defeat, of exhaustion deeper than simply not sleeping enough. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked vulnerable, not in that romantic way that attracted her, but genuinely broken. "Graham, talk to me," she said, kneeling beside him. "I trust you, but I can't help you if you won't let me in. Whatever it is, we can face it together." He looked up, and in his eyes she saw something that frightened her. Desperation. Not the dramatic desperation of movies, but the silent and corrosive kind of someone who sees their world crumbling and doesn't know how to stop it. "Soon," he promised, his voice hoarse. "Soon I'll explain everything. Just give me a little more time. I'm about to resolve it, I promise." But promises were beginning to sound hollow, like bells without clappers that make the motion but produce no sound. And that night, lying beside him but feeling lonelier than ever, Elise understood she was about to face something that would change everything she believed she knew about their relationship. The revelation came in the most mundane way possible. A domestic accident that exposed carefully guarded secrets. Elise, looking for a pen in Graham's study one afternoon, while he was at another meeting, knocked over a stack of folders that scattered across the mahogany desk like cards from a cruel game. They weren't promising business contracts or exciting projects. They were debt notices printed on legal letterhead, lawyers' letters drafted in language that distilled urgency and threat, notifications of lawsuits that accumulated like storm clouds before a deluge. The numbers were so large that Elise had to read them twice to process. Millions of dollars in overdue loans, failed investments, furious partners demanding returns. The empire Graham described with such conviction was, in reality, a house of cards teetering on the edge of total collapse. The companies supposedly thriving were in bankruptcy. The projects he mentioned with pride had failed spectacularly. Everything, the luxurious apartment, the Audi, the expensive dinners, the gifts, was financed with debts he could no longer pay. Elise sat heavily in the swivel chair, the documents trembling in her hands, feeling how her world spun on an invisible axis. It wasn't the loss of luxury that shattered her. It had never been hers to begin with, but the lie. The elaborate facade Graham built, not just for others, but especially for her. Each gift had been bought with borrowed money. Each promise about the future was based on a fiction he knew was unsustainable. The sound of the front door opening pulled her from her paralyzing shock. Graham entered, calling her name with a tired voice, and when he found her in his study surrounded by evidence of his deception, he stopped abruptly. Color drained from his face like water draining from a broken vessel. "Elise," he began, but the words died in his throat. "When were you planning to tell me?" she asked, her voice strangely calm despite the storm roaring inside her chest. "When they came to repossess everything? When we had to flee in the middle of the night? Or never?" Graham literally collapsed, his knees buckling until he sat on the floor with a dull thud, his broad shoulders trembling with silent sobs that shook his entire body. It was heartbreaking to see such a confident man reduced to a frightened boy facing the consequences of his lies. "I thought I could fix it before you found out," he confessed between tears, his voice broken into irregular fragments. "I thought if I made you happy enough, if I showed you what we could have, I'd find the strength to recover everything. Each gift was a promise to myself that I would succeed. Each smile of yours was fuel to keep fighting. But I only dug a deeper hole." "You lied to me," Elise said, and those words contained a world of pain. "Not about the money, Graham. You lied about who you are, about what we are. All this," she gestured around the elegant study, "was built on sand." "I know," he moaned, "and I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. But my love for you, Elise, that was never a lie. You're the only real thing in the middle of all this mess. The only thing that makes me want to be better." Elise stared at him for a long moment, this 40-year-old man crying on the floor as if the world had ended. And perhaps for him, it had. His false empire was crumbling, his lies were exposed, and the woman he loved was looking down at him with eyes full of pain and disappointment. But then, something unexpected happened inside her. Beyond betrayal and anger, deeper than pain, Elise found a well of strength she didn't know she possessed. Raised in adversity, shaped by a grandmother who faced every blow life dealt with renewed dignity, she knew the bitter taste of struggle and the redeeming value of starting over. "Stand up," she finally said, her voice firm but not cruel. "Stand up, Graham." He looked at her with reddened eyes, confused. "We're going to solve this," she continued, "together. But no more lies. Never more lies. If I'm going to be with you, I need the truth, the whole truth, no matter how ugly or painful. Can you give me that?" Graham nodded with the desperation of a drowning man thrown a rope. "Yes. God, yes. I'll give you everything, Elise. The complete truth, every debt, every mistake, every fear. Just, please don't leave. I can't do this without you." "I'm not leaving," she said, though her voice trembled with the enormity of that decision. "But we have to start over. For real. No pretenses, no facades. From zero." And in that moment, kneeling beside him on the floor of the study where she had just discovered the devastating truth, Elise made the most important decision of her life. Not to flee from disaster, but to face it head-on. Not because Graham had money, now she knew he didn't, but because she saw in him the same frightened person she saw in the mirror every morning before meeting him. And if there was anything her grandmother taught her, it was that the true measure of a person isn't in their successes, but in how they rise after falling. The following days were a whirlwind of revelations that fell like dominoes, each triggering another painful truth. Graham, faithful to his promise of complete honesty, unfolded before Elise the complete map of his financial disaster, with the meticulousness of a cartographer tracing hostile territories. Seated at the dining room table, that same table where they had shared so many romantic dinners, they spread out documents, bank statements, lawyers' letters. The numbers were dizzying. $3 million in debts accumulated over the last 5 years, failed investments in real estate projects that never materialized, personal loans from friends who trusted his word and now demanded repayment. "The apartment is mortgaged to the ceiling," Graham explained with a monotone voice, the kind of tone adopted by someone who has cried so much they have no more tears left. "The Audi is financed with payments I can't make. Even some of the jewelry I gave you. I bought it on credit, thinking I could soon pay it off. Every month I robbed Peter to pay Paul, and the mountain only grew. And the estate? Elise asked, though part of her already knew the answer. That dream you shared with me under the California sunset? Graham closed his eyes, pain evident in every line of his mature face. It was never mine to begin with. My father sold it 10 years ago to cover his own gambling debts. The new owner let me visit out of courtesy, that's all. But I took you there, painted that beautiful future with you, as if I had the right to promise something I could never deliver. I was a coward and a liar. The confession hurt more than any other. That moment under the vineyard rose, when he knelt with the ring and spoke of building something meaningful together, had been built on an illusion. Not pure malice, perhaps, but the desperate kind of hope that drowning people have when grasping at anything floating. But Elise, instead of collapsing under the weight of these revelations, felt something surprising: clarity. With each exposed lie, with each false promise revealed, the path forward became more defined. There were no more mirages to chase, only raw reality waiting to be faced. "Okay," she finally said, and Graham looked up surprised. "It's not okay what you did, the lies you told, but it's okay in the sense that now I know exactly where we stand. And from here we can start building something real." "How can you be so strong?" he asked, genuine astonishment mixed with shame. "You would have every right to hate me, to leave and never look back." "Because my grandmother taught me that everyone falls," Elise responded, taking his hand across the table covered with evidence of failure. "The question isn't whether we fall, but whether we have the courage to get up. And you, despite everything, you stood up today. You told me the truth when you could have kept lying. That counts for something." That night they made concrete decisions. Graham would contact each creditor personally, propose realistic payment plans, sell every asset that could be converted to cash. The Audi would be the first to go, followed by the ostentatious apartment. The artwork decorating the walls, purchased during better times, would go to auction. Every luxury object that wasn't essential for living would be sacrificed on the altar of restored honesty. "I'm going back to work at the flower shop full-time," Elise announced. "And I'll look for more hours at the cafe. I'm not going to let you carry this alone, Graham." "But I got you into this mess," he protested. "It's not fair for you to pay for my mistakes." "I'm not paying for your mistakes," she corrected firmly. "I'm choosing my future. And if that future includes helping you rebuild, then it's my choice, not your burden." The days that followed were exercises in humility and transformation. The black Audi that once symbolized status and success was sold at a painfully low price due to urgency. Graham cried while signing the transfer papers, not for the car itself, but for everything it represented, the last visible vestige of his manufactured success. They began the search for a new apartment, something they could afford with their combined real incomes. The real estate agents who once fawned over Graham now barely recognized him when he appeared not in designer suits, but in jeans and a simple shirt. The fall from grace has that cruel peculiarity of showing who was genuine and who merely reflected your wealth like vain mirrors. Finally, they found a small 2-bedroom apartment in Queen Village, a vibrant and humble Philadelphia neighborhood where the aroma of Vietnamese pho and fresh pretzels floated through the corridors, where children played basketball in the streets until late, and neighbors knew each other by name. It was the total opposite of exclusive Rittenhouse Square, but there was something honest in those unpainted walls and creaking floors that past luxury never had. "It's perfect," Elise said the first time they entered the empty space, her voice echoing off the bare walls. "It's tiny," Graham corrected, his expression showing shame. "After everything I promised you—" "It's real," she interrupted, turning to face him directly. "And that makes it more valuable than any palace built on lies." Moving to the Queen Village apartment was like crossing into another country without changing cities. Elise, who had grown up in a similar neighborhood, adapted naturally, greeting neighbors on the narrow stairs, shopping at the farmer's market where she haggled with the skill of someone who never had money to spare. For Graham, each day was a lesson in humility that challenged 40 years of building defenses against vulnerability. The first morning in the new apartment, Elise woke him early. "We're going to Reading Terminal Market," she announced with energy that contrasted with the emotional exhaustion of the previous weeks. "I'm going to teach you how to buy real food." Graham, accustomed to having personal assistants handle such mundane details, followed Elise through the market aisles with the fascination of a tourist in a strange land. She negotiated with vendors, sniffed fruits to determine ripeness, gently pressed tomatoes to assess firmness, compared prices with the precision of a scientist. "These peaches are perfect," she said, handing him one to try. "Sweet, but with that touch of acidity. And look at the price, half of what you paid at those fancy grocery stores." The peach exploded in his mouth with a flavor so intense he involuntarily closed his eyes. When was the last time he actually tasted food, instead of just consuming it at business meetings, where food was merely decoration for important conversations? He couldn't remember. "It's delicious," he admitted, juice dripping down his chin, and Elise's laughter was like bells celebrating small victories. In the evenings, in their modest kitchen with appliances that had seen better days, Elise taught him to cook. Pot roast became his first culinary conquest, though the first 3 attempts ended in sticky disasters. Graham, who had dined at Michelin-starred restaurants more times than he could count, discovered a profound pleasure in the simplicity of browning meat in hot oil, stirring gravy with total concentration, presenting the imperfect result on mismatched plates. "It's not about perfection," Elise explained, as they shared their slightly burned creation on one edge. "It's about paying attention, caring for each step, making something with your own hands. That's true wealth." Work also transformed them. Graham got a job at a small consulting firm, advising startups with the hard-earned knowledge of his own failures. The salary was a fraction of what he once earned, but there was dignity in arriving every morning, doing the work honestly, receiving a paycheck that wasn't built on empty promises. Elise resumed her position at the flower shop full-time, her hands quickly recovering the calluses that temporary luxury had softened. Mr. Henderson received her with a paternal hug, without asking uncomfortable questions about her absence, simply happy to have her back. During weekends, they worked together, paying the debts Graham had accumulated. Each creditor received personal visits, not impersonal phone calls or lawyers' letters, but face-to-face conversations where Graham explained his situation, presented realistic payment plans, accepted responsibility without excuses. Some creditors were understanding, others ruthlessly harsh, but all responded better to direct honesty than previous evasions. "I need 10 years to pay you everything," Graham told one of his former business partners, an older man whose face was marked by disappointment. "But I'll pay you every last cent, even if I have to work until I'm 70. The man studied him at length, then nodded. "Most would have declared bankruptcy and disappeared. The fact that you're here looking me in the eye counts for something. I'll give you those 10 years, but if you miss a single payment, I'll sue you until I take the shirt off your back." "Understood," Graham accepted, shaking his hand with a grip that sealed the promise. But not all creditors were so reasonable. Some sued immediately, demanding seizures and threatening prison for fraud. Legal battles accumulated like storm clouds, each lawyer's letter stealing his sleep, each court summons tightening a knot of anxiety in his stomach. One night, Elise found him sitting in the darkness of the apartment, staring blankly at the wall. "Graham," she called softly, turning on the light. "Sometimes I wonder if it wouldn't have been easier to just give up," he confessed, his voice hollow. "Declare bankruptcy, disappear, start somewhere else with another name, free you from this weight you don't deserve to carry." Elise sat beside him, holding his face between her hands so he would look directly at her. "Listen carefully," she said with an intensity he couldn't ignore. "Giving up is easy, running is easy. Staying, fighting, facing each day, knowing it will be hard, but doing it anyway. That's courage. And I didn't fall in love with a man who promised the sky. I fell in love with a man capable of falling and getting up again. But I dragged you down with me in the fall," he protested, tears rolling down his cheeks. "You had a simple but happy life, and you showed me I could be braver than I thought," she interrupted, "that I could choose to stay when everyone else would run. That love isn't just celebrating easy moments, but holding someone's hands during impossible moments. So no, you didn't drag me. I jumped, Graham, and I would jump again every time." That night, embraced in their small bed with sheets bought on clearance, both slept better than they had in months. Not because their problems had disappeared, but because they had finally learned that falling wasn't the end of the story, just the middle. And the middle, no matter how dark, could always lead to a new beginning. The 7th month of their transformed life, brought an unexpected and unwelcome visitor, Graham's mother. Patricia Montgomery arrived from Boston like an ice storm dressed in Chanel, her presence filling the small Queen Village apartment with an incongruous grandeur that clashed against the modest walls like waves against cliffs. Elise was making coffee when she heard the insistent doorbell. Opening the door, she found herself facing a woman in her early 60s whose perfectly executed plastic surgery couldn't completely hide the disdain in her eyes as she evaluated the poorly lit hallway and peeling paint. "You must be Elise," Patricia declared, her tone suggesting she had just identified a pest. "I need to speak with my son, now." Graham emerged from the bedroom, his face transforming into a mask of caution upon seeing his mother. "Mother, I wasn't expecting you." "Obviously," she replied, entering without invitation and assessing the apartment with a visual sweep that catalogued every imperfection. "So this is where you ended up? Living like a college student in the worst part of Philadelphia, playing house with a girl who—" "Careful," Graham warned, his voice acquiring an edge of steel Elise had never heard. "Watch your words very carefully, Mother." Patricia huffed but modulated her tone slightly as she sat on the second-hand sofa as if it were a throne of thorns. "Your Uncle Robert informed me of your financial situation. The debts, the pending lawsuits, this absurd redemption project you're attempting. Are you really going to waste your life paying debts when you could simply declare bankruptcy and rebuild the Montgomery empire as it should be?" "It wasn't an empire, Mother," Graham responded wearily. "It was a facade built on lies, and I'm not going to repeat Father's mistakes." Patricia's eyes flashed dangerously at the mention of her deceased husband. "Your father built a business from nothing. If he had difficulties at the end, it was because he lived in complicated times. But he had vision, ambition, everything you seem to have lost since this child appeared." Elise, who had been observing silently from the kitchen doorway, felt her blood boil but forced herself to stay calm. This woman had clearly come prepared for battle, and she wouldn't give her the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. "Someone so young," Patricia continued, turning her laser attention to Elise, "can't truly understand what's at stake here. The Montgomerys have a reputation to maintain, businesses that could revive with the right connections, but that requires a certain caliber of companion, someone from proper society with the right connections who understands our world." "Elise understands more about the real world than anyone in those social circles of yours," Graham declared, standing up. "She taught me that true dignity doesn't come from old surnames or important contacts, but from integrity and honest work." "Integrity?" Patricia scoffed. "What good is integrity when you're living in this?" She gestured disdainfully around the apartment. "Graham, you're 40 years old. You've played at being a good person long enough. It's time to return to reality. Reconnect with the family. Use your contacts to get out of this hole." "This is my reality now, Mother," he said firmly. "And it's not a hole. It's honest, it's real, and it's ours." Patricia stood, her regal posture contrasting sharply with the modest surroundings. "Very well. I see she's completely brainwashed you. But let me be perfectly clear. As long as you continue with this farce, don't expect any support from the family. Not financial, not social, not emotional. The Montgomerys don't associate with voluntary failures." She headed toward the door, then stopped, pulling something from her Hermes bag. "A check. This check is blank," she said, placing it on the table with the precision of someone throwing down a glove for a duel. "For you, girl. Fill it in with whatever amount you want. That's my offer for you to exit my son's life. Be generous with yourself. You deserve compensation for this charity experiment you've been playing." The silence that followed was so dense it seemed to have physical weight. Elise slowly approached the table, took the check between her fingers, and held it for a moment that felt eternal. Then, with deliberate movements, she tore it in half, and again, and again. The pieces fell onto the table like sad confetti. "I didn't come for money," Elise said, her voice calm but each word carved with precision. "And I'm not leaving for the lack of it. I came because I recognized in your son someone genuine beneath all the layers of pretense. And I stay because I've seen who he really is when everything else peels away. I don't expect you to understand, Mrs. Montgomery. Coming from where I come from, I learned that a person's true value isn't measured in bank accounts or surnames, but in their capacity to rise after falling. And I have more clarity about what matters than many people twice my age and triple your bank account. Patricia looked at her as if she'd been slapped, her perfect composure cracking briefly to reveal something like genuine surprise. Then, recovering her mask of cold disdain, she turned to her son. "When this inevitably collapses," she pronounced each word like a prophetic curse, "and you come crawling back, begging for help, remember you had options. And you chose this." She left, slamming the door with controlled force, the sound reverberating in the small apartment like distant thunder. Graham was trembling, not from cold, but from the contained emotion of finally defending his life against his mother's judgment. He sank onto the sofa, and when Elise sat beside him, he wrapped his arms around her like she was a lifeline in a turbulent ocean. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for staying, for not taking that check. No one has ever simply chosen me before, not for what I can give them, but despite what I can't." "She was wrong, you know," Elise said, intertwining her fingers with his. "This isn't a hole, it's a home, and homes aren't built with money or prestigious surnames. They're built with daily choices to be together even when it's hard." That night, lying in the darkness, listening to the neighborhood sounds, music filtering from neighboring apartments, teenagers' laughter on the street, the distant barking of a dog, Graham understood something fundamental. He had spent 40 years seeking validation in the wrong places, measuring his worth by external standards, trying to impress people whose approval never really mattered. And here, in this tiny apartment with this extraordinary woman who tore up a blank check without blinking, he had finally found something no amount of money could buy: unconditional acceptance. If there were a thermometer to measure hope, the 9th month would have marked it at its lowest point. Legal battles intensified when 3 of Graham's most important creditors, frustrated by slow payments, decided to coordinate to force a total liquidation of his remaining assets. It wasn't enough that he had already sold everything of value. Now they wanted to garnish the small income he generated from his consulting work. A lawyer's letter arrived on a grey Tuesday, its official envelope seeming like a bad omen even before opening it. Graham read the contents with an increasingly decomposed expression. "They're going to freeze my bank account," he announced, the paper trembling in his hands, "and request a court order to garnish up to 75% of my salary. With what's left, we can't even pay rent." Elise felt as if the ground was moving beneath her feet, but forced herself to maintain composure. "Then we'll fight," she said, though her voice sounded less convincing than she intended. "There has to be some legal way to—" "I already consulted with the court-appointed attorney they assigned us," Graham interrupted, letting himself fall into a chair with a weight that seemed to multiply his body mass. "He says technically they have the right, that I should have negotiated clearer terms before, that now we basically have no options." The following days were a downward spiral that tested every ounce of resilience they both possessed. Graham's bank account was effectively frozen, leaving them depending completely on Elise's salary from the flower shop and cafe. It wasn't enough. Not even remotely close to enough. They began selling personal possessions. Graham's laptop went to a pawn shop. His good suits, the last vestiges of his former life, ended up in a thrift store. Even sentimental jewelry of Elise's, gifts from her grandmother that she swore never to sell, had to go to cover the impossible gap between income and expenses. "No," Graham protested when Elise appeared with her grandmother's pearl necklace wrapped in tissue paper. "That's yours. It's your family history. You can't—" "I can and I will," she said firmly, though her eyes shone with contained tears. "Grandma would understand. Surviving is more important than sentimentality. We can always create new memories." But each sale was a small grief, a piece of identity sacrificed on the altar of immediate survival. And the worst was the constant uncertainty, the feeling of being in quicksand where each movement to free themselves only sank them deeper. The educational project the older investor had proposed, that light at the end of the tunnel that had given them hope, became impossible to prioritize when Graham's mental energy was completely consumed by keeping legal wolves at bay. Meetings were cancelled because he couldn't afford public transportation to get there. Follow-up calls went unreturned because his phone was cut off for non-payment. One night, after another impossible day where nothing went as planned, Elise came home to find Graham simply absent. Not physically. His body was there, sitting on the sofa, but his gaze was empty, lost in some internal horizon where she couldn't reach him. "Graham," she called, touching his shoulder gently. "Graham?" He blinked slowly, as if emerging from a trance. "I was calculating," he said with a monotone voice. "If we worked every available hour of the day, if we ate nothing except rice and beans, if we stopped paying electricity and used candles, if we sold every object we own, including the clothes on our backs, it would still take 30 years to pay it all. I'd be 70 years old, Elise." 70. "Then we'll be 70 together," she responded, though her own heart felt crushed by the weight of that reality. "No," he said, and something in his tone made her stomach contract. "I can't do that to you. You're 24 now. You should be building a life, not burying yourself in the ruins of mine. You could—" "Stop!" Elise interrupted with a sharp voice. "Don't say what I think you're going to say." "You could leave," he continued anyway, without looking at her. "Start over without this weight. Meet someone your age without complicated history, without impossible debts. Have a normal life. Don't you see, Elise? Being with me is condemning yourself to fight battle after battle you can't win." The silence that followed was devastating. Elise felt something break inside her, but it wasn't her resolve. It was something deeper, the understanding that Graham had reached a breaking point where he could no longer see beyond his own despair. "Look at me," she ordered. "Graham, look at me." He slowly looked up, and in his eyes she saw something that terrified her. Surrender. Not the noble surrender of accepting limitations, but the toxic surrender of someone who has lost faith in any possibility of redemption. "I'm going to say this once," Elise declared, taking his face between her hands so he couldn't look away. "So listen well. I don't stay because I'm stupid or blind or because I don't understand what I got into. I stay because I chose this. I chose you, every day since I discovered the truth. And when things get hard, we don't run. We fight. Together. Do you understand? Together. But it's not fair to you," he whispered, tears finally escaping down his cheeks. "You deserve so much more." "Don't tell me what I deserve," she interrupted fiercely. "I decide what I deserve, and I decide I deserve to be with someone who loves me enough to fall and get up again. Someone brave enough to keep trying when everything seems impossible. That someone is you, Graham. Even now. Especially now." But her words, though sincere, couldn't erase the crushing reality of their situation. That night, lying in their bed in the darkness, both pretended to sleep while actually staring at the ceiling with open eyes, each trapped in their own torturous thoughts about futures that seemed increasingly impossible. The following week brought another crisis when Elise got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad flu, but they couldn't afford for her to miss work even a single day. She went anyway, dragging herself through double shifts with a 102-degree fever, because the alternative was not paying rent. Graham found her one night passed out in the bathroom, her body finally surrendering under the combined load of overwork and untreated illness. He took her to the emergency room, where they waited 4 hours because they didn't have private insurance. When she was finally seen, the doctor was direct. "Her body is exhausted. She needs rest, adequate nutrition, stress reduction. Otherwise, this can become something much more serious." "Understood," Graham said, knowing that complying with any of those instructions was impossible in their current situation. Watching Elise doze on the hospital bed with IV fluids dripping into her arm, Graham hit rock bottom. This extraordinary woman, who could have had any life she chose, was literally getting sick to the point of weakness because of him. His mistakes, his lies, his failures. Everything fell on her like a toxic cascade, poisoning the best of her life. Maybe Mother was right, he thought bitterly. Maybe I'm just a voluntary failure dragging others down with me. It was the darkest thought he'd had since everything collapsed, and in that moment, sitting beside the hospital bed under merciless fluorescent lights, Graham saw no way out, only endless depth, interminable darkness, and the terrible certainty that perhaps, just perhaps, the best thing he could do for Elise was let her go. The 10th month found Graham in a state of depression that neither of them knew how to name. He dragged himself through days with the mechanical efficiency of an automaton, fulfilling minimal work obligations, avoiding deep conversations, retreating increasingly into an internal space where Elise couldn't reach him. Elise, still recovering from her physical collapse but emotionally stronger than she'd ever been, watched his descent with a broken heart and growing determination. She recognized the symptoms because she'd seen something similar in her grandmother after her grandfather died. That particular form of surrender that comes not from cowardice, but from total exhaustion of the spirit. One afternoon, while Graham remained on the sofa staring into space, Elise made a decision. She called her grandmother. "I need your help, Grandma," she said over the phone, her voice finally breaking after months of being strong. "I don't know how to pull him out of this dark place. He's giving up and I don't know what to do." There was a pause, then her grandmother's wise voice, modulated with 8 decades of lived experience. "A person's deepest pit isn't where others can reach them, dear. They can only decide to climb up themselves. But what you can do is make sure that when he looks up, he sees a light worth pursuing. Be that light. Be that light." The words resonated in Elise with the clarity of bells on a silent morning. She couldn't rescue Graham, that was his battle to fight, but she could illuminate the way back, make it worth the effort to rise. She started small. She cooked meals she knew he liked, even when it meant she ate less. She left notes in places where he would find them, simple messages of "I love you" or "I'm here" written on napkins folded beside his morning coffee. She curled up next to him on nights when she knew he couldn't sleep, not trying to force conversation, just offering physical presence that said, "You're not alone in this." But she also did something harder. She continued living her own life with as much fullness as circumstances allowed. She visited friends she had neglected. She spent time in the park, reading books borrowed from the library. She helped neighbors with small favors that built community. Because she understood something crucial. If she drowned in his depression along with him, they would both be lost. Someone had to remain swimming to show it was possible. The change began subtly. One morning, Graham noticed the fresh flowers Elise had brought from the flower shop, discards that Mr. Henderson let her take for free, beautifully arranged in a recycled glass bottle. "They're beautiful," he commented, the first voluntary words in days that weren't monosyllabic responses. "Like us," Elise responded. "Discards others consider worthless, but in the right hands can be something precious." It was a small moment, but something in the metaphor resonated with him. He looked at the flowers, daisies with slightly wilted petals, stems that weren't perfectly straight, but that together created a composition that had its own singular beauty. Imperfect, but real. Discarded, but reborn. That night, Graham spoke. Really spoke. "I've been feeling like I'm dead weight," he confessed, sitting on their tiny balcony that barely fit 2 folding chairs. "Like every day I breathe, I consume resources that could be better used elsewhere. Like my very existence is a debt I can never repay." "Those are depression thoughts talking," Elise said gently. "Not truths." "But how do you know the difference?" he asked with genuine confusion. "When everything hurts all the time, how do you distinguish between reality and illness?" "Because I see you," she responded, taking his hand. "And when I look at you, I don't see dead weight. I see someone fighting an incredibly difficult battle who gets up every morning even though it hurts. That's not weakness, Graham. That's the purest kind of strength." "I don't feel strong," he admitted. "I feel broken." "Being broken isn't the same as being finished," Elise said. "Broken bones heal. Broken hearts rebuild. Broken lives find new patterns, but only if we let them heal instead of pretending they were never broken." In the following weeks, with Elise's silent but unwavering support, Graham began the slow work of confronting his depression. There was no money for professional therapy, but he found a free support group for people dealing with financial bankruptcies and associated emotional traumas. The first meetings were excruciating, sitting in a circle of folding chairs in a community church basement, admitting aloud to strangers that he had hit bottom, but they were also liberating. He heard stories from others, a woman who lost her catering business during the economic recession, a man whose investments were swindled by a corrupt partner, a couple who went into debt paying medical treatments for their daughter. Each story was unique, but the common thread was the same. All had believed that failure defined them, and all were slowly learning that survival is its own form of victory. "My name is Graham," he said at his third meeting, his voice trembling but determined, "and I'm learning that getting up doesn't always mean succeeding. Sometimes it just means continuing to breathe when your whole body wants to give up. And that's enough for now. The soft applause of people who understood filled the modest space, and for the first time in months, Graham felt something like hope. Not the grandiose hope that everything would magically fix itself, but the humble hope that maybe, just maybe, he could learn to live with his scars instead of being defined by them. But the universe has a peculiar way of testing fragile resolutions. Just when Graham was beginning to emerge from his deepest darkness, a registered letter arrived. One of his most important creditors had sold his debt to a collection agency known for aggressive tactics. The calls began immediately, multiple times a day, threatening additional legal actions, public disclosure of his debts, total destruction of any financial future. One morning, agency agents appeared at their door demanding entry to assess seizable assets. Although legally Graham didn't have to let them enter without a court order, their intimidating presence in the small hallway where curious neighbors peeked out was humiliating in ways that legal letters never managed. "You have nothing here worth seizing," Elise said firmly, standing in the doorway like a living shield. "You can review your legal inventory. Everything of value has already been sold to pay debts. What remains are basic necessities protected by law." The agents left, but the damage was done. The shame of being confronted like that, in front of neighbors who had shown them kindness, was a brutal blow to the fragmented dignity Graham had been carefully rebuilding. That night he collapsed again, not completely to the previous level, but enough to frighten himself and Elise with the speed of the descent. "It's like being in quicksand," he said, his voice muffled by tears of frustration. "Every time I think I'm gaining solid ground, something pulls me back. When does it end, Elise? When does it finally stop?" "I don't know," she admitted honestly, embracing him while he trembled. "But I know this. Every time you fall, you get up a little faster. Every time the pit pulls you down, you come back a little stronger. I can't promise when it will end, but I can promise you won't face it alone." And in that promise, simple, unadorned, deeply true, Graham found something to hold on to through the long night. It wasn't a solution, it wasn't rescue, but it was enough to keep going one more day. And sometimes, in the darkest moments, one more day is all you need to eventually find your way back to the light. The 11th month brought a turn that neither of them anticipated, proving that life has a peculiar way of offering light, just when darkness seems absolute. On a rainy Saturday, while Elise was working at the flower shop preparing arrangements for a wedding, an older man entered wearing an elegant tweed coat that contrasted with the wet weather outside. She vaguely recognized him. He had been one of Graham's creditors, one of the first to accept a reasonable payment plan instead of immediately suing. "Mr. Whitmore," Elise greeted, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you with something?" The man observed the floral arrangements with genuine appreciation before responding. "My congratulations on your work. There's soul in these arrangements. Not just technique, but understanding of what flowers say when combined correctly." "Thank you," she responded, uncertain where this conversation was going. "I've been watching you and Graham during these months," Whitmore continued, sitting on the stool that Mr. Henderson kept for elderly customers. "The way you handled your situation, with honesty and dignity, even when it would have been easier to run or give up. That's rare these days." Elise waited, not knowing what to say. "I own a network of boutique hotels and inns," he explained. "Small ones focused on authentic experiences instead of mass luxury. I've been looking for someone who shares that philosophy to manage a special project, a hospitality school for young people from disadvantaged neighborhoods, teaching not just technical skills, but the philosophy of genuine service, of creating meaningful experiences." Elise's heart began to race. "My son and we had a falling out years ago," Whitmore continued, his voice taking on a melancholic tone. "Differences about how to manage the family business. He wanted to expand aggressively. I wanted to maintain quality. We said hurtful things, and now it's been 5 years without speaking. This project is my way of building a bridge, something meaningful that could reconnect us through the shared legacy of helping others." He paused, then continued. "You have something money can't buy, Elise. You have someone who believes in you even when you don't deserve it. I saw how you defended Graham before my lawyer when he wasn't even defending himself. I saw your strength when they brought those humiliating papers, and you remained dignified. That's worth more than any MBA or years of industry experience." He paused again, then continued. I want to offer Graham direction of this project. Not out of charity, understand clearly, out of skill. He has business experience, understands failure in ways success never teaches, and most importantly, he has you keeping his feet on the ground. Together, you could create something genuine. Elise felt tears stinging her eyes. But his debts to you will be restructured, Whitmore interrupted. As part of the compensation package, we'll work to pay other creditors directly. It's not debt forgiveness. It's a realistic path to resolution while building something valuable. Would you think about discussing it with him? That afternoon, when Graham came home soaked from the rain after another exhausting day at the consulting firm, Elise met him at the door with bright eyes. "I need you to sit down," she said, guiding him to the sofa. "Something incredible just happened." As she told him about Whitmore's visit and his offer, she watched Graham's face transform, from confusion to disbelief, to cautious hope, to pure fear. "It's too good to be real," he finally said, his voice trembling. "There has to be a catch. Life doesn't work like that, Elise. Not for people like me who messed up so completely." "Life works in many ways," she responded. "Sometimes cruel, as we've learned, but also sometimes with grace. And maybe, just maybe, after months of cruelty, we're due a little grace." But Graham was paralyzed by fear. Fear of failing again. Fear of disappointing another investor. Fear that his depression would return just when he most needed to be strong. Fear that it was all a mirage that would disappear the moment he reached out. "I can't do it," he finally said, standing up and beginning to pace. "I can't risk ruining everything again. I can't take another good man's money and turn it to ash." Elise let him walk, process, fight with his internal demons. Then she spoke. "Do you remember what you told me in the hospital when I was sick from working too much?" He stopped, frowning. "You said I didn't deserve to be sick because of your mistakes, that I deserved better." "Elise, listen," she interrupted. "If you really believe that, if you genuinely believe I deserve better, then give me better. Give me a partner willing to try when opportunities arise instead of one who gives up before starting. Give me someone brave enough to risk failing again, because the alternative is living small forever. Give me that, Graham. Give me your courage, not your fear." Her words hit him like waves breaking against cliffs, eroding the walls of self-protection he had built. And in that moment, Graham made a decision. Not from confidence in himself, because that was still fragmented, but from confidence in Elise, in her judgment, in her strength, in her unwavering belief that he could be more than his depression whispered in the darkness. "Okay," he finally whispered. "Okay, I'll try. We'll try together." The meeting with Whitmore was scheduled for the following week at his office in downtown Philadelphia. Graham showed up in his only decent suit, carefully cleaned but visibly worn, with Elise at his side wearing the navy blue dress that had survived all purges of belongings. Whitmore received them not in a formal boardroom, but in his personal office, a space filled with photographs of hotels he'd built, smiling employees, his son in happier times before the rupture. "Before we start," Graham said, his voice firm despite the butterflies in his stomach, "you need to understand completely what you're getting into. Not just my debts, which you know about, but my mental state. I've been dealing with severe depression. Some days it's all I can do to get out of bed. I can't guarantee I'll never fall back into that place, but I can guarantee total honesty and the best effort I'm capable of." Whitmore studied him at length, then nodded. "I appreciate your frankness, and I'll tell you something. My son, before we separated, also struggled with depression. I never realized, never asked, just assumed he was being difficult when he was actually suffering. That's part of my motivation for this project, to create a space where people can be human, fallible, and still valuable." The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours, covering all aspects of the proposed project. The building Whitmore had acquired in the Kensington neighborhood, the curriculum that needed to be developed, student selection, long-term financial sustainability. It wasn't a fantasy. It was hard work, tight budgets, realistic goals, but it was real, tangible, possible. At the end, they shook hands not as benefactor and beneficiary, but as partners united by a shared purpose. That night, walking back to Queen Village because they still couldn't regularly afford taxis or the subway, Graham stopped under a streetlight and looked at Elise. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" she asked. "For not letting me give up. for being my light when I only saw darkness, for believing in a future when I only saw the past. You saved me, Elise. Not with grand gestures, but with 1,000 small choices to stay when any sane person would have left. No, she corrected, holding his face between her hands. We saved each other, because real love isn't one person rescuing another. It's two people deciding again and again that we is worth more than me. That together they can face things that would destroy anyone alone. And there, under a flickering streetlight on a quiet Philadelphia street, surrounded by the distant murmur of the city's nightlife, they kissed with the sweetness of those who have crossed through hell and emerged not unscathed, but unbreakably united. The following months were a period of literal and metaphorical construction that tested every skill they had acquired during their time in the valley. The building in Kensington that Whitmore acquired for the project was an early 20th century structure, with good bones but completely neglected interior, walls covered in graffiti, broken windows, electrical installations that didn't meet modern codes. "It's perfect," Graham declared the first time they entered, and the look Elise gave him was half amusement, half concern about his definition of perfect. "Explain," she requested, observing the ceiling where water stains suggested multiple leaks. "Because it doesn't tempt us to pretend," he responded, touching a peeling wall with unexpected reverence. "We can't hide behind elegant facades or fake being something we're not. We have to build from scratch, honestly, just like we rebuilt our lives. The building is a perfect metaphor." And so the work began. Whitmore provided a modest budget for essential renovations, but most of the work was done by Graham, Elise, and volunteers they recruited from the neighborhood, college students seeking experience, elderly people with carpentry or trade skills, neighbors who appreciated that something positive was emerging in their community. Graham worked from dawn until after nightfall, his hands, once soft from corporate life, developing calluses as he painted walls, installed shelves, repaired windows. The physical work was cathartic, each hammer blow striking internal demons, each painted wall whitewashing past failures. Elise used her experience from the flower shop to design the reception area, creating a welcoming space with low-maintenance plants and arrangements that students would learn to care for as part of their hospitality training. More importantly, she proposed something that initially seemed strange to Whitmore: a small flower business operated within the school. "Hospitality isn't just about serving," she explained in her presentation to Whitmore. "It's about creating experiences that touch emotions. Flowers do that. And if students learn not just to use them decoratively, but to grow them, sell them, understand their economics, they learn valuable lessons about entrepreneurship too." Whitmore, intrigued by the passion with which she presented the idea, approved a small space and initial budget. And so, Elise's flower business found a new home within the educational project, symbolizing how their two worlds perfectly intertwined. But hard work was only part of the challenge. Developing the curriculum required Graham to face all his failures directly, distilling from each mistake lessons that could be taught without glorifying failure itself. "I want a curriculum session dedicated to how to recognize when you're building on lies," he proposed during a planning meeting with Whitmore and other educational advisors. The advisors looked at each other uncomfortably. This wasn't typical hospitality program content. "It's essential," Graham insisted, "because many businesses fail not from lack of technical skill, but from lack of fundamental honesty. With yourself, with partners, with clients. If we're going to prepare these students for real success, they need tools to brutally self-examine." Elise added, "and a session on maintaining dignity during crisis, because crises will come. The economy fluctuates, plans fail, people get sick, but if you lose your dignity, you lose everything." That's the most valuable lesson we learned. The curriculum they developed was unique, mixing traditional technical skills, hotel management, customer service, basic finance, with emotional and ethical components rarely taught explicitly. Sessions on emotional intelligence, workshops on identifying and managing depression in high-pressure environments, open discussions about the mental cost of failure and recovery strategies. Student recruitment presented another set of challenges. They deliberately went to neighborhoods where youth faced systemic barriers, recent immigration, generational poverty, histories of academic difficulties. They weren't looking for perfect students, but hungry students, those with fire in their eyes and determination in their hearts despite circumstances. Elise participated in every interview, and her instinct for reading people proved invaluable. This one, she pointed after interviewing Marcus, an 18-year-old whose family ran a small soul food restaurant. He has something special, the way he talked about making his mother proud, about being the first in his family to complete formal education. But his academic grades are below minimum standard, one of the advisors objected. Grades measure certain things, Elise responded, but they don't measure hunger and they don't measure heart. Give me someone with little knowledge but lots of heart over someone with all the knowledge but no passion, any day. Marcus was accepted, along with 29 other students who formed the first cohort of the Whitmore Hospitality School. The inauguration ceremony was modest, only 50 people in a newly renovated building that still smelled of fresh paint, but the energy was electric. Graham gave a brief speech without the pretensions of his former life. Some of you have heard I'm a successful businessman. The truth is more complicated. I built companies, yes, but I also destroyed them. I made money, but I lost it all. I experienced success, but also devastating failure that took me to dark places where I wasn't sure I wanted to continue. He paused, looking at the young faces watching him attentively. I tell you this not to discourage you, but to say that failure isn't the end. It's just a chapter, sometimes brutal, but never final unless you choose it to be. This school exists because someone, he pointed to Whitmore, saw value in my failure, saw that scars could become wisdom, and because someone, he looked at Elise, never stopped believing I could get up one more time. There was a moment of silence, then applause that grew to fill the space with affirmation. After the ceremony, as they were cleaning up and the last guests dispersed, Whitmore approached Graham and Elise. "My son called," he said quietly, emotion evident in his usually controlled voice. "He read about the school in a local article. He wants to come visit, meet you both. He said anything that can reunite his father with something this meaningful is something he wants to understand." Whitmore's eyes shone with contained tears. "So, thank you for taking this opportunity and transforming it into something that made possible what I thought impossible, a bridge to my son." That night, exhausted but deeply satisfied, Graham and Elise sat on their tiny balcony with 2 cheap beers and looked at Philadelphia's lights twinkling in the distance. "We're doing something real," Elise said, marveling. "Not a fantasy or empty promise, something tangible that changes lives." "We're building from the foundation," Graham agreed. "Slow, painful sometimes, but solid. And that solidity is worth more than all the false success I chased before." "You know what's most ironic?" Elise asked. "When you promised me the world in that fancy restaurant, you had nothing real to offer. Now, when you promise nothing except hard work and honesty, we're actually building something like a world. Only it's our world, not an imitation of someone else's world." Graham raised his bottle in a silent toast, and she did the same, the soft sound of glass touching, echoing with the promise of futures, built not on illusions, but on the solid rock of truth, lived with difficulty. The 13th month brought trials that demonstrated life never stops challenging, even when it seems you've finally found your path. The school had been operating for 3 months with vibrant enthusiasm. The students flourished under the combination of practical instruction and genuine emotional support. Marcus, the young man Elise had defended during interviews, was particularly standing out, showing natural instinct for service that comes not from training but from deep understanding of what it means to make others feel valued. Then the letter arrived. One of the collection agencies that had bought Graham's debts was suing, alleging that the terms of his contract with Whitmore constituted fraudulent asset transfer designed to evade legitimate responsibilities. They demanded immediate termination of Graham's employment contract and total garnishment of any future salary or compensation. "They can't do this," Elise said with fury, after reading the lawsuit. "The agreement with Whitmore was transparent, approved by all original creditors." "Not all," Graham corrected, his voice dangerously calm. "This agency bought the debt afterward. They weren't in the original negotiations. Technically, they might have a case." The weight of uncertainty settled over them again like cold fog. Could everything they built crumble over a legal technicality? Whitmore, upon learning, hired the best corporate attorney he could afford, not for Graham directly, but to protect the project itself. Legal meetings followed, each costing time and emotional energy they could barely spare. But it was during this period of maximum stress that the true strength of what they'd built became evident. The students, hearing rumors of legal troubles, spontaneously organized a support campaign. Marcus led the creation of a petition documenting how the school was transforming lives, collecting testimonies from families, attracting positive media attention that complicated the collection agency's simple narrative of debtor evading responsibility. Graham Montgomery isn't evading anything, Marcus wrote in an op-ed he managed to publish in a local paper. He's paying his debts the only real way, building value for others. The law should distinguish between those who flee and those who fight. The public pressure worked. Not completely. The collection agency didn't withdraw the lawsuit, but it resulted in mandatory negotiation. After weeks of legal back and forth, they reached a settlement. The agency would receive increased payments from Whitmore's arrangement, but Graham's employment contract would remain intact. It wasn't total victory. It meant additional years of tight payments, but it was sustainable. Ironically, Graham observed after signing the final documents, this demonstrates exactly what I'm trying to teach the students, that the consequences of your actions don't disappear just because you regret them or work hard, but that moving forward despite consequences is possible, difficult, but possible. But the legal crisis wasn't the only trial. Midway through the second semester, Elise began experiencing severe abdominal pains that she initially ignored for lack of time and resources for medical care. When she finally collapsed during a class, she was teaching on floral design. The students rushed her to the hospital. The diagnosis was appendicitis requiring immediate surgery. Without comprehensive health insurance, the bill would be devastating. Years of financial progress potentially erased by a medical emergency. Graham sat in the waiting room while she was operated on, his mind spinning with panic and guilt. If I had managed things better, if we hadn't spent so much on legal defense, if I had prioritized health insurance. Whitmore found Graham there, sinking into a spiral of self-flagellation. "Stop," the older man ordered, sitting firmly beside him. "This isn't punishment for your past mistakes. This is simply life happening. Appendicitis doesn't discriminate between those who've perfectly managed their finances and those who've struggled. It happens. But I can't pay." "The project has insurance that covers key personnel," Whitmore interrupted. "Elise qualifies. It won't be free, there will be deductibles, but it won't be ruinous. Breathe, Graham, you've learned a lot. But you still need to learn that accepting help isn't failure." The surgery was successful, but Elise's recovery took weeks. Graham became her dedicated caregiver, bringing her meals, helping her move, reading to her during long afternoons when pain made concentration difficult. The roles completely reversed. Now he was the one sustaining, the one remaining firm, the one providing light in her darkness. And in that inversion, Graham discovered something crucial. Strength isn't never needing help. Strength is being able to receive help when you need it and provide it when others need it. Reciprocity, not impossible self-sufficiency, was the foundation of true love. One night, while changing her bandages and she winced in pain, Elise asked, "Do you regret it? All this, me. Sometimes I think if you had chosen to simply restart alone, maybe you'd be better off." Graham stopped, looking directly at her. "Every day with honor is better than a lifetime of comfort built on shame. That's what you taught me. So no, not a single second of regret. Not one." While Elise recovered, the school students demonstrated what they'd learned about community and care. They organized shifts to bring home-cooked meals to the apartment, offered help with household chores, took care of the flower business so it wouldn't collapse during her absence. Marcus especially showed leadership, organizing everything with the efficiency of someone twice his age. "Fayu taught us that hospitality is caring," he told Graham when he came to deliver a container of his mother's gumbo. "Now it's our turn to care for you." When Elise finally returned to school after 6 weeks, the students had prepared a modest but deeply moving welcome. The reception area was filled with flowers they had grown themselves, each species chosen for its symbolism: sunflowers for loyalty, white roses for new beginnings, lavender for healing. "They're not perfect," Marcus admitted with a shy smile. We don't have your talent, but we made them with love, which you said is the most important ingredient. Elise cried. Not from sadness, but from understanding something fundamental. They had created not just a school, but a chosen family, united not by blood, but by shared values, by mutual respect, by the understanding that everyone is simultaneously teacher and student in life's journey. That night, lying beside Graham in their modest bed with her body still aching but her heart full, Elise whispered, "You promised there would be no more lies, that you'd give me truth no matter how painful. You kept that promise, Graham. And it turns out that truth, though difficult, builds something stronger than any fantasy ever could. You taught me that," he responded, kissing her forehead with tenderness that contained years of painfully learned lessons. "You taught me that foundations matter more than facades, that depth beats height, that slow and honest beats fast and fake every time." And as nighttime Philadelphia pulsed outside with its inexhaustible energy, they fell asleep holding hands, their fingers intertwined like roots underground. Invisible to casual observers, but fundamental to everything that grows above. The 15th month marked a turning point no one anticipated. The school had completed its first full year, graduating its first cohort of 30 students, with jobs secured at partner hotels and restaurants. The 100% placement rate attracted significant media attention, not just from local outlets, but from national publications interested in alternative educational models. But the true transformation wasn't measured in headlines, but in private moments that revealed how far they had truly traveled. Whitmore organized a dinner to celebrate the school's anniversary, inviting not just staff, but also all of Graham's creditors with whom he had managed payment agreements. The idea was bold, potentially uncomfortable, but designed specifically for one purpose: transparent accountability. "All of you bet on my recovery," Graham explained at the start of the dinner, his voice firm but humble. "Not with debt forgiveness, but with reasonable terms that made rebuilding while honoring commitments possible. I wanted you to see directly what you bought with that bet. Not just an educational project, but genuine transformation." He presented a complete financial report, not just of the school project but of his personal finances, showing every payment made, every debt reduced, the slow but steady progress toward being completely free of liabilities. It was vulnerable in ways businessmen rarely are, removing all protective layers to show raw humanity underneath. One of the creditors, an older woman who had lost her initial retirement investment in Graham's failure, stood up. "When I discovered what happened to my money," she said with a voice trembling but controlled, "I hated you. Honestly, I wished terrible things for you. But these months, receiving consistent payments, though small, receiving personal notes explaining each time a payment was late and why, seeing news about this project, my anger transformed into something different. Not complete forgiveness, not yet, but respect. And that's more than I expected to ever feel." Her testimony opened floodgates. Other creditors shared similar perspectives. Some were still bitter, and had the right to be, but even they acknowledged there was a fundamental difference between someone who runs from responsibility and someone who faces it day after day, payment after payment, sincere apology after sincere apology. Elise watched Graham during these exchanges, seeing how he absorbed every word, the harsh and the kind, with equal openness. This was a transformed man from the one she met 17 months ago. The arrogant businessman who promised the moon had been distilled into something purer, a human who understood his limitations but refused to be defined only by them. After the formal dinner, as guests mingled, Whitmore's son, David, who had attended the celebration and observed everything with studied caution, approached Graham and Elise. "My father has talked a lot about you both," he said, his tone careful. "And honestly, at first I was skeptical. It sounded too redemptive, like a Hollywood movie. But seeing this," he gestured around the space filled with graduated students, creditors conversing civilly, palpable energy of genuine community, "I understand why he believed it was worth rebuilding this bridge between us." He extended his hand to Graham. "You gave my father something I couldn't for years, a purpose that goes beyond balance sheet numbers and investment returns. For that, thank you." The handshake was simple, but its meaning resonated deeply. Graham had just facilitated reconciliation between a father and son, separated by years of pride and unhealed wounds. Not intentionally, it had never been his goal, but simply by being authentic, he created space where others' authenticity could also flourish. Later that night, back at the apartment with aching feet from standing all evening, Graham turned to Elise with an expression she couldn't read. "I have to tell you something," he began, and something in his tone made her heart race with worry. "I've been keeping a secret. Not a big one, not a lie, but something I didn't share." Elise waited, pulse accelerating. "When I sold everything during those first months, there was one thing I didn't sell. I couldn't." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "The ring I gave you at the estate. I recovered it before creditors could seize it, hid it, because it was the only thing I wanted to preserve from my former life. Not for its monetary value, but for what it represented. The moment when I believed I could promise you a future, even if that future was false." He opened the box, revealing the modest ring with its small diamond that reflected the apartment's dim light. "But today, after seeing what we actually built together, I realize this ring represents something different now. Not a promise I couldn't keep, but a promise we kept together. Of truth, of perseverance, of love that chooses to stay even when staying is the hardest thing in the world." He knelt, his knee touching the worn floor of their modest apartment, and looked up at her. "Elise, I asked you to marry me once, based on beautiful lies. Today I ask again, based on ugly truths we transformed into something beautiful. Will you marry me? Not for what I can give you, because you know exactly how little that is, but for what we are together, imperfect, scarred, but unbreakably real." Tears rolled down Elise's cheeks as she looked at this man she had known at his false peak and loved through his deepest fall and worked beside during the slow climb back towards something like redemption. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. 1,000 times yes. Not because circumstances are perfect, but because we learned perfect doesn't exist, and real is infinitely more valuable. He slid the ring onto her finger, the same ring that had represented beautiful lies now resignified as transformed truths, and they stood together, embracing in the darkness of their small apartment that contained more real wealth than any mansion ever could. Outside, Philadelphia continued its endless nighttime pulse. But inside those modest walls, two people had completed a journey few undertake and fewer still finish. The journey from ego to humility, from promises to presence, from shining mirages to solid truth. And the ring on her finger, though the same physical object, was now completely different, because symbols derive their meaning not from their material composition, but from the stories they carry. And this ring's story had been rewritten, painful chapter by transformative chapter, until it became not a reminder of broken promises, but a testament to redefined promises, fulfilled not in grandeur, but in the cumulative grandeur of 1,000 small gestures of choosing love over ease, truth over comfort, together over apart. 2 years later, the Whitmore Hospitality School had expanded to 100 students per year, with a waiting list that grew constantly. Elise's small flower business had become a social training program where students learned from planting to sales, from botany to client negotiation. The modest annual graduation ceremony had transformed into a significant community event that attracted employers from across the country. Seeking workers with the technical skills and emotional fortitude the program uniquely cultivated, Graham had paid 70% of his original debts. The remaining 30% would be paid over the next 8 years according to updated agreements, but the burden no longer overwhelmed him. It had become part of his life's rhythm, like breathing or eating, simply something he did, consistently, without drama. His mental health had also stabilized. Depressive episodes still occurred occasionally, because depression is a chronic illness, not curable but manageable. But now he had tools, a support community, and something crucial, self-compassion. He had learned that having a bad day didn't mean being a bad person, that temporarily relapsing didn't erase all progress, that mental health, like physical health, requires continuous maintenance, not constant perfection. Elise had flourished in ways even her initial optimism couldn't have predicted. At 26, she was respected not just as a partner in the educational project, but as an innovative thinker in human-focused hospitality. She had been invited to speak at conferences about integrating social responsibility into business, about alternative educational models, about maintaining humanity in typically transactional industries. They had married in an intimate ceremony at a Napa Valley estate, not the one Graham falsely promised to own, but a small one that a friend of Whitmore's lent for the day. The wedding cost less than $5,000, flowers grown by students, food prepared by graduates now working as chefs, music provided by neighbors with guitars and voices, but it was richer in love and meaning than any society event with unlimited budget could be. During their vow exchange, which they wrote themselves, Graham had said, "Elise, I promised you the world once and couldn't deliver. Today I don't promise the world. I promise days. Days of honest effort. Days of listening when you speak. Days of getting up when I fall and helping you up when you fall. Days of choosing us over me, truth over comfort, together over easy. It's not grand, but it's real." "And real is the only thing worth promising," Elise had responded. "Graham, you promised there would be no more lies, and you kept that promise in ways that transformed us both. Today I promise to continue choosing this, choosing you, choosing us, every day. On easy days where love feels natural, and on hard days where love is deliberate work. I promise to see not just who you are, but who you're becoming. I promise to be your honest mirror, your safe harbor, your companion on this beautiful, imperfect journey called life." Now, on a sunny September afternoon, they sat on the tiny balcony of their Queen Village apartment. They had chosen not to move, even when they could afford something bigger, because this space held their most precious memories, watching new students arrive for orientation. "Do you ever miss that life?" Elise asked, though she knew the answer. She asked occasionally, not from insecurity, but because she liked hearing his answer evolve each time. "Not for a second," Graham responded without hesitation. "That life was beautiful on the outside and hollow on the inside. This life is modest on the outside and abundant on the inside. There's no comparison." He paused, then continued. "You know what's ironic? When I was desperately trying to be rich, I never felt poorer. Poor in genuine love, poor in purpose, poor in peace. Now, with a fraction of what I had then, I feel rich in ways money never bought. Rich in a relationship that survived impossible trials. Rich in work that matters. Rich in community that sustains us. That's true wealth." Elise smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "My grandmother used to say the best flowers grow not in perfectly tended gardens, but in concrete cracks. Because they have to fight to exist, they develop deeper roots that make them impossible to eradicate." "We're concrete flowers," Graham observed with a smile. "The most beautiful ones," she agreed. Below on the street, they heard children's laughter playing ball, the distant call of the pretzel vendor who appeared every afternoon, the constant murmur of life being lived in all its imperfect and vibrant variations. Marcus, now an assistant instructor at the school while completing night university studies, passed on the street and waved up. "Curriculum planning meeting in an hour," he shouted. "We'll be there," Graham responded, returning the wave. As they watched Marcus disappear around the corner, Elise reflected on the complete journey, from that black Audi that stopped in front of her modest apartment years ago, through the valley of painful revelations and exhausting reconstruction, to this moment of imperfect but genuine peace. "You know what we learned," she said, more to herself than to Graham, "that the most important promises aren't the ones you make in moments of grandeur. They're the ones you keep in moments of ordinary difficulty. Promising love under a California sunset is easy. Choosing love while paying debts, fighting depression, facing society's judgments, that's where real promises live." "The promise that changed everything," Graham murmured, remembering the title a journalist had given to an article about their story, "wasn't the one I made at the estate. It was the one you made when you tore up that blank check. When you chose to stay when leaving would have been completely justified." "No," Elise corrected gently. "The promise that changed everything was the one we made together. To never again hide behind comfortable lies. To face painful truths together. To build something real even if it takes decades. That promise, kept day by day in gestures large and small, is what brought us here." The sun was beginning to set, painting the Philadelphia sky in shades of orange and pink that rivaled any California sunset that once tried to impress her with empty promises. But this sunset was different. It promised nothing except its own temporary beauty. and in that temporality resided its deepest truth. "I love you," Graham said, the words simple but loaded with the weight of everything they had survived together. "I love you," Elise responded, "not despite the journey we took, but because of it. Because it took us from who we pretended to be to who we really are. And it turns out who we really are is good enough. More than enough." They kissed as the sun descended completely, bathing Queen Village in golden light that democratized everything it touched, making peeling walls shine with the same beauty as distant palaces. And in that kiss lived the understanding that some take entire lifetimes to reach, that true love isn't found in the heights of first promises, but in the deep valleys where it's tested, broken, and rebuilt with trembling but determined hands. That the best promises are those kept not in moments of strength, but in moments of weakness. Not when it's easy, but when it's impossible. Not because you promise the world, but because you build, honest brick by honest brick, a home where two imperfect souls can finally rest without pretending, without hiding, without ever lying again. And that sometimes, just sometimes, the most broken promises pave the way for the most unbreakable loves.